Hello, and welcome to Facility Resilience, the podcast where we cover facility design, operation, and maintenance, in addition to business continuity and resilience strategies. I'm your host, Jennifer Getz, and today I'm joined by Tim Coombs, who works as an advisor for the Center for Crisis and Risk Communications, and he will be one of our keynote speakers for the upcoming Continuity Insights Management Conference. So, Tim, thanks so much for joining us on our podcast today.
Oh, thank you for asking.
Of course, and we're excited to learn a little bit more about what you'll be speaking about, which your session is going to be about scandals. So I'm really looking forward to this. And to get started, I'd love to hear about your experience with business continuity and how you got into this space.
Sure. It started out when, I started on the academic side, and, as a young academic, you're trying to find areas to research. We teach, but also a big part of our job is to do research. And early on, I went to this conference that was primarily just practitioners, and there are people who practice crisis communication, business continuity. And I was really struck by their commitment to trying to help people. And I thought, well, I want to research in that area because that has direct applications to actually making life better for people. And so I did research in that area, and that research led into consulting. And then when I left academia a few years ago, I went specifically into just doing some type of consulting work with the center, and I've been very happy with that.
That's awesome. And now, with the topic that you'll be covering at our conference on scandals, the title of your session is Not Just Another Crisis. So why are scandals not just another crisis in your own words? And really, why do you think this is an important area for business continuity and resilience professionals to focus on in 2025?
Well, the scandals kind of fall out of your typical kind of risk quantification because, we like to quantify risk and have numbers on those. But the scandal really drives you into that more sort of qualitative, hard to really quantify what's out there, but it's a very strong risk. And what makes scandals unique among crises is the moral component to it, that there's some sort of moral violation at its core that leads to moral outrage. And moral outrage is a very specific type of emotion. And sometimes people use it loosely, like, oh, there's moral outrage online. Well, moral outrage is really that there's a sense of injustice. There's been some kind of violation of a moral norm, that this was intentional by the organization, and then it was motivated by greed. An example of that would be Capital One. They're under fire because perhaps they withheld up to $2 billion of interest from their own customers. Well, clearly that's an injustice. That was intentional, and that was motivated by greed. And this moral outrage really changes the crisis. And what we found is that the typical types of responses you use in a crisis don't help when you have moral outrage. Because when you have moral outrage, they want some type of punishment. They need to see that you are somehow suffering as a result of your crisis. And so instead of thinking about, well, how can I minimize the damage from all this, you need to think about how can I embrace the pain and move through the damage and try to retain my stakeholders as well. Because when you have this moral outrage, that's when people start thinking, wow, this organization, they're really not like me. And they begin to doubt and question the relationship with the organization. It can break away. And that's why the topic is so important, because the scandal adds that new dimension. And if you fail to address that moral nature in your responses and how you communicate with your stakeholders, you're more likely to alienate them and eventually to lose them.
I can imagine. So ultimately, what do you want the audience to really take away from your presentation?
I want them to take away the need to take that moral component seriously, because it's very easy to kind of just discount and go like, well, that's not really important. That's something, like, ooh, it's hard to quantify, so it doesn't really matter. No, it matters a lot. When you start looking at a desire to punishment, that moral outrage is just such a critical component to all that. And so to take that seriously and to make sure their messaging as they're moving along and trying to end the crisis really does help you to try and address that and to rebuild that relationship with your stakeholders.
Well, Tim, this has been great, and I am so excited for you to dive into this topic more. I imagine with social media and the ability for people to have their outside opinions, it's very easy for there to be a social justice or moral call, and it's something more organizations, I imagine, will be facing in the future.
That's That's especially true with social media. And nowadays, we're also seeing a lot of polarization, as you mentioned, with the social issues. So you're more likely to get drawn in and to have your actions scandalized now than you were in the past, because it's easier now to scandalize, because scandalization requires attention, and social media can give you that type of attention. So organizations are only going to see more of this in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, like I said, we're so excited to see your presentation and to have you at the show this year.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I really look forward to the presentation and talking with people about it.
Thank you also to our audience members for listening to this podcast episode, and we'll see you in the next episode.